All right, so we've all heard about the rock star components in our computers, right? You know, the super smart CPU, that lightning fast RAM. But have you ever actually stopped and thought, how do these things even talk to each other? How does the brain send a command to the memory?
I mean, you can have the most powerful parts in the world, but if they're just sitting on your desk, they're just a really expensive pile of silicon. So what's the magic ingredient? What's the one thing that connects them all and turns that pile into a real working computer?
Well, that's where this thing comes in. It's both the skeleton and the central nervous system of your PC. It's the absolute foundation. And that, my friends, is the motherboard. And in this explainer, we're going to dive deep and figure out what makes it tick.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, let's try a little thought experiment. We're going to use a metaphor that makes this whole thing super simple to understand. Instead of a machine, let's picture your computer as a huge, bustling city. So at its core, a motherboard is just a big old printed circuit board, a PCB. But that's like saying a map is just a piece of paper. Its role is so much bigger. In our digital city, the motherboard is the entire city plan. It's the roads, the power grid, the zoning laws, everything that lets all the different parts of the city exist and work together. It doesn't do the thinking itself, no, but it's what makes all that thinking even possible.
And you know, if the motherboard is the city plan, then the chipset, that's City Hall. It's the traffic control center of the whole operation. Think about it. The CPU, that's like the city's CEO, right? It gives the big commands. But it's the chipset that's down in the weeds, directing the flow of data between the CPU, the memory, the storage, all of it. The chipset basically decides how modern and fast our city can be.
All right, so we've got our map. Let's put on our walking shoes and take a tour of this digital city, shall we? We're going to check out all the key districts and see exactly where the most important components live and what they do.
And our first stop, well, it has to be the most important building in the entire city. The main event. We're talking about the presidential palace.
This right here is the CPU socket. And just as the name suggests, this is the home of the computer's brain. Now here's the absolutely critical part. Compatibility. It's not one size fits all. Just like you can't jam any old key into a lock, your CPU has to have the right physical shape, like an LGA socket for Intel CPUs or an AM socket for AMD, to fit perfectly into its palace. Get this wrong and nothing works.
Okay, from the center of government, let's head over to the financial district, the city's banks. This is where the system keeps all its ready cash, its liquid assets. And here they are, the RAM slots. In our city metaphor, this is where the CPU keeps its cash on hand, all the active data it needs right now for immediate tasks. And it's pretty simple. The more slots you have, the more banks our city can have, and the more working capital it's got to play with.
Right. Every great city has to have an industrial zone, you know? A place where all the specialized, heavy-duty work gets done.
On our motherboard, that industrial zone is right here, with these PCI slots. See that long one? The X16 slot? Think of that as a gigantic factory with its own private superhighway. That's reserved for the most power-hungry component of all, the graphics card. And then you have these shorter slots. Those are for your smaller, more specialized factories. Maybe a pro-level sound card or a crazy fast networking card.
And this is a perfect illustration of how our city gets supplies from its long-term warehouses. It's all about storage. Over here, you've got the SATA ports. Think of these as the old traditional loading docks. Totally reliable for your older hard drives and even some SSDs, but kind of slow. But then you have this, the M.2 slot. This isn't a loading dock, it's a high-speed, direct conveyor belt that plugs a modern, ultra-fast SSD straight into the system. For pure speed, oh yeah, it's a complete game changer.
So how does our little city talk to the rest of the world? Well, it's through these main gates on the back, the rear I/O panel. You've got your USB ports, which are kind of like all-purpose gates for any citizen or cargo. Then you've got the Ethernet port. That's the international superhighway connecting us to other cities, also known as the Internet. And of course, the audio jacks. That's the city's radio station, broadcasting sound out and taking communications in.
But you know, hidden somewhere on this huge city map is this tiny, tiny component that most people just completely ignore. But without it, our whole city would be lost in time, literally.
It's this little guy. the small coin-shaped BIOS battery. We're calling it the city's official clock keeper. See, when you shut down your computer, the main power grid goes dark, right? But this little battery keeps the system clock ticking away, and even more importantly, it remembers the super essential startup info, like which warehouse, which hard drive it's supposed to wake up from. It's like the city's most basic, fundamental memory.
You know, this whole idea of a central, life-giving board, it actually brings up a pretty interesting question about the name itself. Why on earth do we call it a motherboard? Well, as it turns out, the name is actually perfect.
It's pretty simple, really. It's called the motherboard because it is, literally the parent board. It hosts all of these other expansion cards that you plug into it. And back in the day, those expansion cards were actually called daughter boards. So the motherboard is the matriarch that holds the entire family of components together and makes them work as one.
Okay, let's zoom back out for a second and bring this all home. After our little tour of the digital city, what's the one big idea you should walk away with?
It's this. Without a motherboard, you know how many parts of your PC would actually work? A big, fat zero. Nada. You don't have a computer, you just have a box of expensive, useless parts.
At the end of the day, the motherboard is everything. It's the skeleton providing the structure, it's the nervous system for all the communication, and it's the power grid that brings it all to life. It's the one thing that lets the brain, the memory, and all the other organs work together as a single, living, breathing machine.
So we've seen how our digital city is built, with the presidential palace right at its heart. But that just leads to the next, even bigger question, doesn't it? What actually sparks that first thought inside the brain? How does a CPU, well, think? How does it perform billions of calculations every single second? Well, that's a whole other story, and it's one we'll tackle in our next explainer. Thanks for joining us, and as always, stay curious.